Apostate, apostle. It's kind of like a palindrome. Hello there. This is the backstory for the video I'm making the case for deism in as a response to Mr. Theramin Trees. I call this the backstory because it's going to be a synopsis of our conversation so far, which has taken place exclusively through text. The text can be found on Theramin's video, Reasoning About God, which itself was a response to QuinnEGorges' video, Are You There, God? My objections were that roughly 6:35 in Theramin's video he asserted that God is implicated in the unsavory acts of humans taking their unsavory actions in his name. I replied that God cannot act if we are to truly have free will. For the record, Theramin believes in neither God or free will, though he has been kind enough to use my definitions for this discussion. This video again is my synopsis and not the entire synopsis. While I will endeavor to keep this as unbiased as possible, the original was only text and can be found in pieces on Theramin's video. Links to everything relevant will be in the description for this video. And now the synopsis. As I said, I had taken issue with the idea of holding God liable for the actions of his creations, and then made specific example to Theramin's argument for Adam knowing God personally and still managing to disobey a clearly issued direct command. This happens in Genesis. I then said that this was applicable argument only in a theist perspective of God because Adam had no knowledge when he was given the order, and this story was not an accurate reflection of reality, which I claimed would be shattered by the loss of free will if God intervened directly in mortal affairs. Theramin replied that the concept of free will in Queenie's video was clearly invalidated since she believes in the Bible and God was clearly able to interact directly with no detrimental effect on free will. I had maintained that the reality is God would wreck free will, and Theramin pointed out that the reality is there's no evidence for God's existence in the first place. I pointed out that in the fable Adam does not know right from wrong, so he can't make ethical decisions. Theramin rightly pointed out that you don't need ethics to have free will, and that Adam clearly made a choice. Quote the text. I said this means he was completely without a basis for ethical decision-making, and Theramin replied, but that can still be free will, the freedom to decide, just not making decisions informed by ethics. Decisions made from desire can still be free in this context, but Genesis is a mess, and this is the result. I'm defending Adam's free will when the whole thing is rubbish, but I'm doing it from QuinnEGorges' framework, and in that framework I believe my case stands. I was forced to concede this point. We both also seem to agree that Genesis is a mess and Adam had free will. We moved on to the deist argument for God's non-involvement in the universe. I defined God as being a being responsible for the creation of the universe that was omnipotent, omniscient, and perfect in my video on free will and God, which I uploaded as a response to Theramin's work. In the next comment, Theramin responded that an omnipotent, omniscient being is capable of unambiguously showing its existence, and this would not compromise free will in the same way that knowing birds, trees, etc. exist doesn't compromise free will. Further, an involvement in moral affairs would still not compromise free will, or are you saying the police compromise it? I responded to act unambiguously, we would all have to know the message came from an omnipotent, omniscient, and perfect being. For the message to be unambiguous, understanding of the full ramification of those concepts would have to be granted. Humans act on situations as we perceive them. With that kind of clarity, the message would not be a suggestion or a way of thinking or an idea, it would be unopposable. I think you are still locked into the being described in Genesis. To this Theramin responded, I am not at all locked into the being described in Genesis. It seems you are. In this case, an omnipotent, omniscient being, deist or theist, could reveal its presence, so that we're all able to perceive its presence. It would know what that would take, and have to do no more than that. Its presence would not take away from free will. He then points out that he doesn't subscribe to free will, he's just granting it for this argument, as people would still be free to react. I responded, I didn't say omniscient and omnipotent alone, I also added perfect. That is the killer. Were it only for the first two, we would only need to understand all power and all knowing. This concept leaves some room, but when you throw perfect into the mix, we all have to perceive the message coming from a perfect being. You brandy about the term just enough. What is just enough to show you God? Anything short of the complete definition is less than God and cannot be just enough. Remember, you defined an unambiguous message. No one anywhere can doubt that the message comes from anything but God. We can't just perceive its presence. That could be explained by any number of things afterwards. For the message to be unambiguous, we would need to have the understanding of the being communicated to us beyond the senses. There could be no doubt that it was the creator of the universe communicating. Theramin responded, "Hang on, I'm not branding about, or in fact, bandying about the term just enough. To my knowledge, I haven't even used it, but what I have written certainly isn't tossed off in a casual way which characterizes me." And, again pointing at my comments here, to that effect he was correct. I had not used just enough. I had inferred it from his previous comment, and I in fact used bandying incorrectly as brandying, though I think that might be more fun. Theramin continued, "And perfect is not the killer. The only killer regarding perfect is your using of this descriptive term to assign unknowability. That's the killer to practical discussion. B, we know the sun exists. Do we know everything about it? We can know something exists by having evidence of it. We do not have to know everything about it, and fundamentally we can't know everything about anything until we know what goes on at every scale, beyond the macro and the micro. I see my TV works, and I have a rough idea of how. Could I build you one right now? No. Do I know what's going on inside of it on a molecular level? No. But it's there. It exists empirically." I responded, and to be fair, Theramin has yet to have a chance to respond to this response. This is all true, however it sidesteps my point a bit. The earlier example of a policeman and the more recent sun and TV are all limited physical objects and people. We may not have a full understanding of them, but we can come to terms with them very well within the framework of the rest of our experiences. I don't need to know the number of electrons in the sun to know it's responsible for keeping things nicely warm here on Earth. However, if someone came and told me that the sun was passing out instructions for morality, or communicating at all, I'd be highly skeptical. The same goes if the police officer began to proselytize outside of his job in law enforcement, or if the TV got up and asked if I'd spend less time on the computer. Not likely. We are suggesting an unambiguous message from God. All any of us have in regard to God is speculation. Some will disagree, but we can have fun together at the expense of that. To be unambiguous, we'd need some understanding that the communicator was the Almighty in all its impossible, highly illogical, and yet stubbornly believed in amazingness. You are right that by definition God needs to be unknowable, infinite, and logically impossible. This is why I never tried to prove God, just show that unambiguous interference from it would be a paradigm-ending experience for us. Put it another way, that old saw about having to have faith to know God is really the only way to know God. The concept is unprovable, unscientific, and in any scientific inquiry, ridiculous. However, it is a concept that sticks with quite a lot of us, and this moves us to my next video, in which I will put the case for deism as useful.